I didn't realize it all at once. It happened the day he was overwhelmed and didn't call me. No message. No, "Can I talk?" No familiar panic in his voice. I found out later that he had already talked it through, with someone else. That's when it hit me. I wasn't the person he reached for anymore. And once you lose that place, everything else starts to fall apart. I'm a woman who always believed emotional closeness was the core of a relationship. Not control, not jealousy. Just being the first person your partner turns to when life gets heavy. We were in a long-term relationship. We lived together. We shared routines, plans, and a future that felt stable. I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't checking his phone. I wasn't looking for signs of cheating. But when I realized I was no longer the person he called when he felt overwhelmed, I knew something fundamental had changed. This isn't a story about an affair. It's a story about losing emotional priority. Quietly. Do you think losing that emotional role is already a form of betrayal? Share your opinion in the comments, subscribe, and share this story with someone who might relate. For a long time, I was the person he called when things got heavy. Not when things were easy. Not when he just wanted to talk. When he was overwhelmed. When work felt too much. When decisions scared him. When he didn't know what to do next. He would call me. Sometimes late. Sometimes quiet. Sometimes already exhausted. And I would listen. I didn't rush him. I didn't fix everything. I just stayed there. That role mattered to me. Because it meant trust. It meant closeness. It meant I was his safe place. I didn't realize when that started to change. There was no argument, no fight, no clear moment I could point to. It just slowed down. The calls became less frequent. The pauses between them got longer. At first, I didn't notice. Or maybe I didn't want to. I told myself he was busy. That stress changes routines. That adults don't always need to talk things through. I didn't question it. Then one day, something small happened. He had a rough day. I could tell by the way he spoke when he got home. Short answers. Distant eyes. Normally, that was when he'd call me later. Or sit next to me. Or say, "Can we talk?" That night, he didn't. He went quiet. Checked his phone. Took a breath. And that was it. Hours passed. No call. No message. No, "I need you right now." I found out later, casually, almost accidentally, that he had already talked it through. Not with me. That was the moment something inside me stopped feeling secure. Not angry, not dramatic. Just aware. Because once you realize you're no longer the person someone turns to when they're overwhelmed, you start questioning everything that comes after. Do you think losing that emotional role already means the relationship is changing? Or is it still normal at this point? After that night, I started paying attention. Not in a suspicious way. Not like someone looking for evidence. More like someone trying to understand a feeling that wouldn't leave. I noticed how often he seemed settled before we talked. Like the storm had already passed somewhere else. When I asked how his day was, he didn't unload anymore. He summarized, "It's fine now. I figured it out. It's handled." Those answers were new. Before, he needed to talk things through. He needed to say things out loud. He needed me. Now, he sounded calm in a way that didn't include me. I told myself this was growth. That maybe he was learning to manage stress better. That I should be proud of him. I didn't want to be the woman who needed to be everything. So I stayed quiet. I watched the pattern form slowly. When something stressful happened, he reached for his phone. Not after talking to me. Before. A quick message, a pause, a deep breath. Then he was okay. I started feeling like I was arriving late to moments I used to be part of. One evening, I asked something simple. "Who do you usually talk to when things feel like too much?" I didn't accuse. I didn't push. He hesitated, just for a second. I don't know, he said. It depends. That answer stayed with me longer than it should have, because it used to be obvious. It used to be me. I began questioning myself instead of him. Maybe I had become harder to talk to. Maybe I reacted too emotionally. Maybe I expected too much closeness. I adjusted without realizing it. I waited longer before sharing my feelings. I softened my words. I told myself I didn't need to know everything. But something felt wrong. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy, because emotional distance doesn't announce itself. It settles in quietly. And the more I tried to give space, the more space seemed to grow. That's when I understood something uncomfortable. I wasn't being pushed away. I was being bypassed. And once that happens, it's hard to pretend nothing is changing. At this point, would you still tell yourself this is normal? Or would you start trusting that something feels off? At some point, noticing wasn't enough anymore. I started feeling it. Not in my head, in my body. A tightness in my chest when he picked up his phone instead of looking at me. A quiet disappointment when I realized I was waiting for something that wasn't coming. I stopped expecting the call. That part hurt more than I wanted to admit. Because when you stop expecting something, it usually means you've already adjusted to losing it. I remember one afternoon clearly. He had a stressful meeting. I knew it. I could hear it in his voice when he left that morning. Normally, I would get a call later, or at least a message saying, "Can I talk for a minute?" That day, nothing. Hours passed. When he finally came home, he seemed fine, calm, centered, too centered. I asked, carefully, "How did it go?" He shrugged. It was rough, but I talked it through. That sentence landed hard, because he didn't say with me, and he didn't say with anyone specific. Just talked it through. I didn't push. I nodded. I told myself it wasn't worth turning into a thing. But later that night, lying next to him, I realized something painful. I missed being needed. Not in an unhealthy way, not in a dependent way. In the way partners lean on each other when life feels heavy. I missed being the first place he landed emotionally. I started feeling invisible in moments that used to connect us. When I shared something that overwhelmed me, he listened. But his attention felt divided, like his emotional energy had already been spent elsewhere. I began questioning whether I was imagining it. Was I being dramatic? Was I romanticizing the past? Was this just what long-term relationships turn into? But deep down, I knew the difference between comfort and absence. Comfort feels warm, absence feels hollow, and the hollow feeling was growing, slowly, quietly. That's when the thought became impossible to ignore. If I wasn't the person he turned to when he was overwhelmed anymore, what did that make me now? Do you think this kind of emotional shift happens naturally over time? Or does it always mean something deeper is wrong? I still didn't know who she was. At that point, I didn't even need to. What mattered wasn't her name. It was the space she was taking. I started noticing it in the gaps, the pauses between his thoughts, the moments when he seemed emotionally full before I even spoke. When something bothered him, he didn't sit with it anymore. He didn't pace the room. He didn't say, "I don't know what to do." He reached for his phone, not in a secretive way, in a familiar way, like muscle memory. A quick message, a short pause, a breath that came easier afterward. Then he was okay. And I was still standing there, holding questions that hadn't been asked. I didn't confront him. I didn't demand explanations. I watched how often he said, "I already figured it out." How rarely he said, "What do you think?" That shift hurt more than I expected. Because being asked what you think isn't just about advice. It's about being included. One evening, I told him something that had been weighing on me. Not dramatic, just honest. I spoke slowly, carefully. He listened. He nodded. Then he said something that stayed with me for days. "You're probably overthinking this." It wasn't the words. It was the certainty. The tone of someone who had already discussed my feelings elsewhere. Someone who had already reached a conclusion. I asked him, gently, "Have you talked to someone about this?" He hesitated. Just enough. "Yeah," he said. "It helped me get perspective." Perspective. That word felt heavy, because perspective implies distance, and I hadn't realized he had stepped that far away from us. That night, I sat alone longer than usual. I wasn't angry. I wasn't jealous. I was trying to understand how I could still be in the same room and feel so far outside his emotional world. That's when I understood something quietly devastating. I wasn't losing him loudly. I was losing him through small, repeated choices, and each one pushed me just a little further from the place I used to hold. Do you think emotional space can be shared without damage? Or does someone always end up replaced? That's when it stopped being just about him. It became about me. About the way I started paying attention to myself differently. Not with kindness, with doubt. I caught myself replaying conversations in my head. Not to understand him, but to check myself. Did I say too much? Did I sound emotional? Did I make things heavier than they needed to be? Those questions were new. I had never felt the need to edit myself around him before. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, not to look good, to look useful. Was I still easy to talk to? Still calm enough? Still someone he felt safe opening up to? I hated that I was thinking like this, but I couldn't stop. I noticed how I started choosing silence more often. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't want to be too much. When something overwhelmed me, I hesitated. I asked myself if it was worth bringing up, if he had the space for it. That realization scared me. I was filtering my emotions in a relationship that was supposed to hold them. He didn't ask why I was quieter. He didn't notice the pauses. And that hurt in a specific way, because it meant my absence was easier for him than my presence. I wasn't being pushed out. I was slowly making myself smaller. I remembered how it used to be, how I could call him without rehearsing, how I could talk without apologizing, how I didn't need to compete with anyone for emotional space. And I wondered when I had stopped feeling safe enough to just be. One night, I typed a message to him, something honest, something real. I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. Not because it wasn't true, but because I already knew how it would end. He would process it somewhere else, and come back calm, and I would still be here, holding the weight. That's when the thought finally formed clearly. If I have to disappear emotionally to stay connected, then the connection is already broken. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Have you ever noticed yourself shrinking just to stay emotionally close to someone? I didn't wake up one day ready to confront him. That's not how it happened. What changed was quieter. I stopped arguing with the feeling. I stopped telling myself I was imagining things. Stopped explaining his distance in ways that made it easier to stay. Instead, I let myself sit with the truth, slowly. I noticed how calm he was around me now. Not peaceful, settled, like someone whose emotional needs were already being met. I realized something uncomfortable. He didn't need me the way he used to. And even harder to admit, he didn't seem to miss that. I started paying attention to how often he asked about my inner world, not my schedule, not logistics, me. The answer was simple, rarely. When I shared something heavy, He listened politely. But there was no follow-up, no curiosity, no leaning in. It felt like my emotions were being acknowledged, not held. I asked myself a question I had avoided for weeks. If I stopped trying to reconnect, would he notice? So I did. I pulled back just enough to see what would happen. I stopped initiating deeper conversations, stopped filling the quiet, stopped offering emotional access without being asked. The silence stretched, and he didn't reach for me. That hurt more than any argument could have, because it wasn't rejection. It was indifference. I realized I had been carrying the emotional labor of closeness alone. I was the one checking in, the one adjusting, the one trying to bridge the gap, and without my effort, there was no bridge. That's when I understood something that changed everything. I wasn't afraid of losing him to someone else. I was afraid of staying in a relationship where I had already lost my place. I didn't need proof. I didn't need a confession. The absence was loud enough. And once you accept that, you stop asking the wrong questions. You stop asking why he changed, and you start asking why you stayed silent for so long. If someone no longer reaches for you emotionally, do you think it's something that can be rebuilt? Or is it already gone? For the first time, I stopped thinking about fixing us. Not because I didn't care, but because I was tired of carrying something alone. I started asking myself different questions. Not, how do I make this better? But what am I accepting? Those questions felt heavier. I noticed how often I had been waiting for him to reach out, waiting for him to notice, waiting for him to choose me again. Waiting had become a habit, and habits shape how you see yourself. I imagined what choosing myself would actually look like. Not dramatically, not angrily, just honestly. It would mean no longer explaining why emotional closeness mattered to me. No longer justifying my need to be the first call. No longer shrinking so someone else could feel comfortable. That idea scared me. Because choosing myself didn't guarantee anything else. It didn't promise clarity. It didn't promise relief. It only promised truth. I watched him one evening as he sat across from me. Calm, distracted, settled. I realized something quietly painful. If I stayed, I would have to accept being optional. Not officially, not openly, but functionally. And I knew myself well enough to know that acceptance would slowly change me. I thought about the woman I was before all this, the one who spoke freely, the one who didn't second-guess her worth, the one who felt chosen without asking. I missed her. And I wondered how long I could keep choosing this relationship without losing her completely. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't announce anything. But internally, a decision began forming. Not a final one. Not yet. Just a quiet shift from waiting to be chosen to considering choosing myself. And once that shift happens, nothing feels the same anymore. Do you think choosing yourself means giving up too soon, or finally listening to what the situation is telling you? I didn't pull away to make a point. I didn't do it to see if he would chase me. I didn't do it to teach him a lesson. I did it because I needed to hear myself think. So I stopped reaching first. I didn't check in the way I used to. I didn't ask how he was coping. I didn't fill the space when conversations slowed down. I let the quiet exist. At first, nothing happened, and that told me more than I wanted to know. Days passed where we talked about practical things, schedules, plans, small updates, but not feelings, not the kind of conversations that used to pull us closer. I noticed how easy it was for him to stay surface level, how little effort it took to keep things comfortable. Comfortable isn't the same as connected. I watched myself in that space. I felt calmer, not happier, calmer. There was less tension in my chest, less waiting, less hoping. That scared me. because relief shouldn't come from emotional distance. One evening, he asked if something was wrong, not urgently, not deeply, just enough to acknowledge the change. I answered honestly, "I'm just giving you the space you seem to need." He looked confused. He said things felt different, that I seemed quieter, more distant. I nodded, because that was true. What I didn't say was that things had felt different for a long time. I had just stopped compensating for it. He didn't ask more. He didn't lean in. And again, that silence answered the question. Distance doesn't create clarity by itself. It reveals what was already there. And what I saw was this. Without my effort, the connection didn't deepen. It stayed where it was. And that meant I had been doing most of the emotional work. I went to bed that night understanding something important. If pulling back feels like relief instead of loss, then staying close had already been costing me too much. Do you think creating distance is sometimes the only way to see the truth? Or does it just speed up the end? At that point, nothing dramatic had happened. No fight. No confession. No final argument. Just clarity. And clarity is harder to ignore than chaos. I stopped asking myself what he might do next. I started asking myself what I could keep living with. I noticed how rarely I felt anxious anymore. How the constant waiting had faded. How the tightness in my chest had loosened. That scared me, because it meant I was already detaching, not out of anger, out of acceptance. I watched him move through our shared space like someone who felt settled, not distant enough to leave, not close enough to reach, comfortable. And I realized something quietly painful. He wasn't struggling with this the way I was. He wasn't questioning. He wasn't restless, which meant the imbalance was real. I thought about bringing it up again, about explaining, one more time, why emotional closeness mattered to me. Then I stopped, because I wasn't confused anymore. Explaining would only reopen a conversation whose outcome I already understood. I imagined two futures. In one, I stayed. I kept adapting, kept accepting less while calling it growth. In the other, I left. Not because I didn't love him, but because I loved myself enough to stop disappearing. Neither future felt easy, but only one felt honest. One evening, he asked me how I was doing. I paused, not because I didn't know, but because I knew exactly how I was doing. "I'm tired," I said. He nodded. He didn't ask why, and that was the moment it became clear. The decision didn't arrive as a breakup. It arrived as understanding. You can't stay in a place where you are no longer reached for, not without slowly losing yourself. And once you truly understand that, the next step stops being a question. It becomes a responsibility. At this stage, do you think understanding the truth is already a decision? Even before you act on it. I didn't leave in a rush. There was no dramatic moment where I packed my things overnight. No shouting, no ultimatums, just a quiet certainty that settled in and didn't leave. I realized I had already been living without him emotionally for a while. I just hadn't named it. The hardest part wasn't letting go of him. It was letting go of the version of us I kept hoping would return. I finally said it out loud one evening. Not angrily, not accusingly. "I don't feel like I'm the person you turn to anymore." He looked surprised. Not defensive, just caught off guard. He said he didn't mean for that to happen, that it wasn't intentional, that he didn't think it was a big deal. And I believed him, but intention doesn't erase impact. I told him something I had finally understood clearly. I don't want to compete for emotional closeness. I don't want to explain why being the first call matters to me. And I don't want to slowly disappear just to keep a relationship comfortable. He asked if this meant I was giving up. I shook my head. I'm choosing myself. That was the first time those words felt real. Leaving wasn't easy. People questioned it. Some minimized it. He didn't cheat. Nothing really happened. But something did happen. I stopped being the place he landed when life felt heavy, and I refused to pretend that didn't matter. I learned that emotional loss doesn't always come with proof. Sometimes it comes with absence, and choosing yourself isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's steady. It's necessary. I didn't leave because he chose someone else. I left because I stopped being chosen, and I finally chose myself. Do you think I made the right choice in the end? If you enjoy real, thought-provoking Reddit-style stories told from a female perspective, subscribe to the channel for more.